Our final speaker, I would love to invite up Evie Litwok, founder of Witness to Mass Incarceration and the Suitcase Project, who has a lot more to say than what we're going to let her say right now. I know, 150 words. Can I just say, in June, I'm still going to say 150 words, and I know you're going to ignore it, and I love you for it. I do. Evie has a lot to say on this subject, and we're honored to have her here tonight.
I can barely start with 150 words, and I did my best. I want to thank Rabbi Kleinbaum, Rabbi James for inviting me here today. I am a formerly incarcerated Jewish lesbian and a child of 2 survivors of the Holocaust, so I'm speaking from direct experience. And before I start the prepared remarks, and I know the rabbi is going to kill me, but having listening to what people said, I just wanted to react a little bit to some of what I heard. It's hard to be in an audience hearing people talk about mass incarceration when you have been incarcerated. I also want to mention that I brought with me my friend Chastity Nasworthy, who's 8 days out of prison. Let me suffice it to say there are no reentry facilities for any of the 700,000 people that come home every year. There is nothing, and we survive by helping each other or having friends help us. I also want to say mass incarceration is not just 2 words. It's far worse than anything anybody can imagine. It's sadism, it's horrific, it's sexual violence, it's unspeakable. And having heard my parents speak about the Holocaust, I can tell you with certainty that outside of the gas chambers, we had the identical experience. Sexual abuse, sexual assault, physical assault, slave labor. Go down the list, my father and I and my mother and I had very little different else to say. I implore everybody to recognize when they're talking about mass incarceration that there are a disproportionate amount of LGBTQIA people in prison. It's not mentioned enough. 42% of the people, 40% of the women inside prison self-identify as queer, 10% of the men. And we are disproportionately put in solitary confinement and abused. So when we talk about mass incarceration, we need to say that as well. And one more implore, and then I'll go into what I was going to say. I implore you to let us lead the revolution. I implore you to let our voices, you need to hear what we need for you to do. Because we know what we need. So now, I hope that was okay. So, I'm going to speak a few words about what being incarcerated through a Jewish lens looked like for me. In 2009 and 10, I was living with my mother, who was disabled. She couldn't hear, she couldn't speak, and she could barely walk. But she insisted on coming to my sentencing hearing, which was 3 hours one way, because she wanted to speak to the judge. She said, "Your Honor, I'm a Holocaust survivor. I've suffered enough for a lifetime. My daughter, she's been a fantastic daughter. Without her, I cannot exist. She's been doing everything for me. I will die without her." To which the judge said, "Your daughter is a monster. She's going to prison for 2 years." We went home, and you unpack for jail. You get undressed. So I was putting things away, and my mother, who's about 4'9", who's adorable, walks in with a walker, very serious look on her face, and says, "I have something to say to you." And I said, "Okay." She said, "Prison is going to be harder for you than concentration camp was for me." And I looked at her, I said, "You were in Auschwitz, are you crazy?" She said, "I was 12 years old, you are 60. And it wasn't until I was in solitary confinement years later that I thought about what else she said, which is, I was a kid. I didn't know what was going on. You are an old woman, you're 60. I got a little offended at the old woman part, but you are going to remember everything that happened in your life every day. And she was right. The moment you enter prison, you know you've left the free world. And within an hour, you go through the one experience that everybody remembers, which is your first strip search. An officer took me into a cold and dingy room, ordered me to undress in front of her, to pee in front of her, to lift my breast so she could check for paraphernalia, to bend over and cough so she could check if I had anything or brought anything in my vagina or my anus. There's not a person I know who I haven't interviewed that told me that at that moment, on that first day, they never wanted to see the inside of a prison again. Now, I happen to have come out as a lesbian day one, and I can't get into it because Rabbi James ordered me not to. No, she cut me my wrist. And I was punished. I slept in a particular situation that didn't allow for me to fall asleep for the entire time I was in prison. And as a work assignment, I went into prison at age 60. So most people at age 60 are given a little bit of mopping to do, and then they're allowed to sit down and read a book. No, but because I came out and I was told that, they gave me the assignment of sweeping streets, sweeping rocks off of streets with a broom. I was incarcerated the first time in West Virginia, where it's 100 degrees for months, and they knew I had a medical condition of high blood pressure and heart disease, and they let me stand and sweep streets. Now, at first, I remembered a story that my mother told me, which was in 1939 in Poland, when the Germans first came in. They took the men, the religious men and the business leaders, out for 3 weeks. And my mother's father, my grandfather, had jet black hair, a jet black beard. When they brought them back 3 weeks later, they had beat them relentlessly. And when my mother saw her father, she was frightened because he now had gray hair and he was permanently bent over from the beatings. And to add to their humiliation, the Germans asked for the families, the mothers, and the children to come out so that the men could sweep the streets in front of them to shame them further. And as I swept the streets every day, I felt that my grandfather, who I had never met, was sweeping beside me. Prisoners get to make one decision, which is religion. They can be whoever they want, however they want, and they can change as much as possible. So 6 weeks before Passover, the people who have listed themselves as Jewish get a sheet of paper to buy kosher for Passover food, which includes like chocolate macaroons, chocolate matzahs, and stuff you don't have on a prison compound. So of course, as soon as the list comes out, everybody's around me, I want in on this, I want some of the chocolate-covered matzah, but 35 women convert to Judaism. And after Passover, everybody converts to Muslim because they love that food. And that's the one little joy if you can get a little joy out of prison, you take it. So there is no medical care in prison. There is no medical care in prison. Do not let anybody tell you there's medical or dental or even mental health. And if anybody wants to talk to me, I just call me. We had a physician's assistant who saw 1,100 women that were on my compound. Whether you had a headache, cancer, a broken foot, or a cyst, this man said the same thing. You're fat, walk on the track, drink water. A woman went to see him who was clearly close to death. Her name was Miriam Hernandez. She walked in, he gave her the fat speech. She died 2 weeks later when her gallbladder collapsed. I was so pissed that I wrote a story and had it posted. I wrote a story that the officer could have saved her life with a simple blood test. My article was sent email, posted on my website. About an hour after it was posted, I was arrested, shackled, and thrown into solitary confinement. Just so you understand, solitary is a prison within a prison. It's run by a handful of people, and they report to nobody. So under those conditions, these are the kinds of things that happen. Solitary has all fluorescent lights, and they keep them on in order to give you a headache. So I had migraines, I had vertigo, which I never had, and I knew I had high blood pressure, and I begged, please take my blood pressure. 2 weeks after begging, they took my blood pressure. It was 200 over 100. And I looked at the guy, I said, you know, both sides of my families all died of strokes and heart disease. Can you take me to a hospital? And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, we get $75,000 if you die in prison. You get a roll of toilet paper, and this is a big issue in prison. This is probably one of the biggest issues. You get a roll of toilet paper and you're in solitary, and when you ask for a second one, the officer looks at you and says, wipe yourself. Wipe yourself. There's till today not a shortage. They don't give women pads, and they don't give people toilet paper. It's not as big of an issue in men's prisons. Now, I'm in solitary with 60 women who were screaming, not at the same time, but 24 hours a day. Get me the fuck out of here. And you're hearing it through cement and stone, and it's the kind of noise that you don't forget for the rest of your life. You hear those voices. Many women tried to commit suicide, some succeeded. I can tell you that I thought I've had a good life, and it would be really okay with me if I didn't wake up. And I didn't just have that thought one night. It was too much, and I was ready to say goodbye. Now, you don't know what day or time it is in solitary confinement because the windows are blocked. You may get to go out for an hour, but you're still disoriented. I heard a chaplain call my name. I didn't know why, and he put 3 pieces of matzah and grape juice in the slot, the food slot. And at that moment, I realized it's Shabbat. It's Friday night. I had a reference point, and I started sobbing. I remembered who I was, and I knew I would survive as my mother did before me. Thank you very much.
Evie will also be our guest speaker tomorrow night at services, at our Shabbat services, and will be speaking afterwards. We will be, as a congregation, working on making sure that we are, in this way, directly supporting somebody who is a returning citizen coming out of incarceration. So everybody is invited that tomorrow night.